Story 1. It was the 1st of October, and the crisp autumn breeze was already in the air. Fall had officially arrived, and I could not have been happier since it has always been my favorite season. My boyfriend, Nick, and I had just moved in together, and this was our first fall in our new home. I wanted to surprise him by decorating the place with all kinds of autumn and Halloween-themed decorations while he was at work. I thought it would be a cute gesture. I made a trip to Marshall's and a few other stores to grab some decorations, and I also scoured apps and websites for deals. One of my searches on Facebook Marketplace caught my eye. It was a listing with a picture of a large green plastic container filled with fall decorations. The ad said, "Everything must go. Entire container of fall-themed decorations for sale, only $20. It seemed like a steal. The bottom of the ad mentioned that the seller was clearing out the house and had other items for sale. Intrigued, I clicked on the seller's profile. The profile belonged to someone named Cody. The page was pretty sparse. Everything was set to private. His profile picture was a close-up of a gray trucker's hat, tilted in a way that hid his face. The cover photo was a blurry image of a lake. Scrolling through his listings, I noticed an odd mix of items for sale. A supposedly new iPhone for $700, some women's clothing, Christmas decorations, and other miscellaneous things. I decided not to overthink it and messaged him about the container of fall decorations. Cody replied almost immediately, confirming the container was still available. He told me it was full of tableware, outdoor decorations, and more. Excited, I told him I could pick it up that evening if he was available. He said he would be home around 9 o'clock and sent me his address. When I looked up the address on Google Maps, it was in a town that did not have the best reputation. Still, the house looked normal enough. Neatly kept lawn and 2 cars in the driveway in the street view photo. To be on the safe side, I asked my friend Lisa to come along. After picking her up, we set off on the half-hour drive. The journey gave us time to chat and catch up. As we approached the town, Lisa started joking about how sketchy the area seemed. Although she laughed, I could tell she was partially serious. The streets were dimly lit, and most of what we saw were traffic lights and closed storefronts. I was starting to feel uneasy when my phone buzzed in the cup holder. Cody had messaged me, saying, "When you get here, you can come right in." I showed Lisa the message, and she immediately frowned. "That's weird. Just ring the doorbell when we get there," she suggested. I agreed. When we arrived, the house looked different from the photo. There were no cars in the driveway, and only a faint light could be seen through the closed blinds. I messaged Cody to let him know we were outside, and Lisa and I both watched the house closely. As we waited, we noticed the blinds in one of the windows shift slightly, as if someone was peeking out. A moment later, the blinds snapped back into place and Cody messaged, "I'm at the door. You can come in." Lisa whispered, "This feels off. Maybe we should just leave." I was about to agree when the front door opened slightly and a man, presumably Cody, peered out. He only showed half of his body and waved us inside. "Hey, I'm here," he said in a deep, unsettling voice. Lisa and I hesitated. I called out his name, but he did not respond. Instead, he stepped back into the house, disappearing from view. Lisa tugged my arm. "Let's go," she whispered. But then Cody's voice boomed from inside. "It's here. Come on in." Reluctantly, we stepped up to the doorway but kept the door wide open behind us. The smell that greeted us was unpleasant, a mix of mothballs and something sour. We heard heavy footsteps moving further into the house, and then Cody called out again from another room, "It's over here." Lisa gripped my arm tightly, and I could tell she was on edge. We cautiously entered the next room, where we were met with a bizarre scene. The living room was dimly lit, with outdated furniture and a faded pinkish-red carpet. The smell in this room was even worse, something rotten and nauseating. In the middle of the room was a red container with a green lid. Cody stood beside it, staring at us. This was the first time I got a good look at him. He was tall, with a rugged, unfriendly face. Something about his expression made me uneasy. "Come on, open it," he said, motioning toward the container. I noticed immediately that this container was not the same one from the ad. The color and shape were entirely different. "Why do you not open it yourself?" I asked. He smirked and said, "You are no fun." His tone sent chills down my spine. Lisa and I started backing away toward the door. Then he lifted the lid, and the stench that poured out was unbearable. It was enough to make our eyes water. "Let's go," I muttered, grabbing Lisa's hand. We bolted out of the house, not stopping until we were in the car with the doors locked. Lisa kept urging me to drive, and I fumbled with the keys, my hands shaking. By the time we sped off, the front door of the house was shut, but I could not shake the feeling that Cody was watching us. That night, I told Nick everything. He was horrified and asked for the address. I made him promise not to go there, but he said he just wanted to look it up. The next day, Nick came home late from work. He admitted that he had driven to the house out of curiosity. An older woman had answered the door and insisted she lived there alone. She seemed completely unaware of Cody or his Facebook ad. When Nick looked up the property records, they listed the homeowner as a woman in her late 60s. The whole experience was deeply disturbing. From that point on, I decided to avoid picking up items from strangers' houses. No deal is worth that kind of risk. Story 2. It all happened back in 2019. I remember it clearly because that was the year I had finally moved out on my own. I had landed a temporary job in Asheville, North Carolina, and it felt like the perfect excuse to start living independently. I was 22, fresh out of college, and excited to have my own apartment right in downtown Asheville. It was a great setup. Most of what I needed was within walking distance, but I had my car for any adventures or errands further out. One of the things I loved most about living in North Carolina was the abundance of hiking trails. Asheville itself had plenty of beautiful spots, but I was eager to explore beyond the city. One place I'd heard about, but never visited, was DuPont State Forest. People raved about it, especially the waterfalls. So, one random Wednesday in October, I decided to check it out. The timing felt perfect. The leaves were just starting to change, the air was crisp, and I had the day off. Plus, being midweek, I figured I'd have the trails mostly to myself. The drive took just under an hour. When I arrived at the park's parking area, I found the trailhead and started my hike. The path was peaceful, and I felt completely alone in the best way. The week had been rainy, which meant the waterfalls would be at their best. That's what I was most excited for, Triple Falls and High Falls. After a couple of miles, I reached Triple Falls. The view was stunning. Fun fact, a scene from The Hunger Games was filmed there. I sat on a rock for a while, snapping photos and soaking it all in. That's when I noticed her. A woman was standing a little ways off on the trail, just staring at me. Trying to be polite, I waved at her. She did not wave back. Instead, she slowly turned and walked deeper into the woods, disappearing from sight. It was odd, but I brushed it off. I figured she was just one of those people who preferred solitude. After a bit more time at the falls, I decided to keep moving. Climbing the slippery rocks didn't seem like a great idea, so I stuck to the trail, which eventually led me to High Falls. It was just as breathtaking as the first spot. Once again, I stopped to take pictures and enjoy the view. And once again, I saw her, that same woman, standing in the woods, watching me. This time, I pretended not to notice. I kept looking at my phone, acting like I was texting or something. After about 10 seconds, I glanced up again. She was gone. From what I could tell, she looked to be around 55 years old, with short, grayish blonde hair. But honestly, she was always far enough away that I could not make out many details. It was strange, but I convinced myself there was nothing to worry about. I continued along the trail until I reached a covered bridge. I stopped there for some water and took a few more photos. As I leaned on the edge of the bridge, I glanced back toward the trail I had just come from. There she was again, standing at the edge of the bridge. I had not heard her approach, and I was sure she had not been there when I arrived. She just stood there, watching me. I had had enough. I walked toward her, calling out, "Excuse me." She turned around and started walking away quickly. For her age, she moved fast, almost unnaturally fast. A part of me wondered if she needed help, but something about the whole situation felt off. I decided not to follow her. After a few more minutes on the bridge, I turned back. I had been hiking for close to an hour, and it would take just as long to get back to the car. On the way down, I passed a younger woman walking her dog. I stopped her and asked if she'd seen an older woman pass by. She said no. To make light of the situation, I told her about how the woman had kept popping up, staring at me, and disappearing. We both laughed about how creepy it sounded, but she agreed it was strange. The rest of the hike down was uneventful. I passed one other person who gave me a friendly nod, and that was it. By the time I reached my car, I felt relieved but also a little silly for letting the whole thing get to me. Later that day, I went out for drinks with a girl I had been seeing. Over pumpkin spice beers and a baseball game, I told her about the woman on the trail. We laughed about it, chalking it up to a weird coincidence. That night, I went to bed as usual. I rarely wake up in the middle of the night, but this night was different. Something startled me awake. As I tried to shake off the grogginess, I became aware of a figure standing at the foot of my bed. It was a woman. My blood ran cold. It felt like my entire body had frozen, and my heart was pounding out of my chest. It was her, the woman from the trail. I screamed as loud as I could, scrambling to push myself against the headboard. She stood there for a moment longer before turning and walking out of the room. I grabbed the lamp on my nightstand, turned it on, and shouted, "Who's there?" The apartment was silent. Knife in hand, I turned on every light in the place, searching every room, every closet, and under every piece of furniture. No one was there. Still shaken, I called my dad. Half asleep, he listened as I told him what had just happened. He tried to calm me down, suggesting that I had probably been in a half-asleep state and hallucinated the whole thing. He said it was not uncommon for the brain to conjure up familiar images in that state. At the time, his explanation felt plausible. I managed to go back to sleep that night, but not without barricading my bedroom door with a dresser. 2 days later, I learned that my mom's estranged sister in Germany had passed away. I had never met her, but when my mom returned from the funeral and showed me a prayer card with my aunt's photo on it, my stomach dropped. The woman in the picture looked exactly like the one I had seen on the trail and at the foot of my bed. To this day, I cannot explain what happened. I was raised Catholic, but had never been particularly religious. This experience, though, shook me to my core and left me questioning everything I thought I knew about the world. Story 3. Carlos and I have always been the type to do dumb things together. We had been friends since we were 10 years old, and by the time we were 21, we became roommates. We lived in Brunswick, Georgia, the small coastal town where we grew up. It had its ups and downs, but was an okay place overall. As we got into our 20s, though, it started to feel pretty boring. One thing we always joked about was this creepy old house on the edge of town. It stuck out because it looked like something from a different century. Everybody knew it was abandoned, and we all made up stories about its history growing up. That October, with Halloween vibes in full swing, Carlos and I decided we would finally check it out. It sounded like a fun way to mix things up, a little adventure to spice up our Friday night. After work, we grabbed some fast food, a couple of beers, and our baseball bats, because who knew what we might run into. We parked down the road to avoid looking suspicious and walked the short distance to the house. It was pitch black on that part of the street since the abandoned house, and the one across from it had no lights. There were no street lights either, just darkness. Once we got to the front yard, we switched on our flashlights and started looking for a way in. The backyard seemed like the best bet since trying to get in through the front door felt way too obvious. Surprisingly, the back door was unlocked. The house was not boarded up, and none of the windows were broken. We both knew it was abandoned, but it almost seemed like whoever left had not bothered to secure it at all. Inside, the place felt like a maze. It was oddly cramped, with too many small rooms. Carlos wandered off into another room while I explored the ground floor. He called out, "Yo, there's still furniture everywhere." I yelled back, "Yeah, it looks like whoever lived here just disappeared." The furniture was old, the kind you'd find in your grandma's house but covered in layers of dust. It felt like nobody had touched it in years. I found a small hallway with a few doors leading to what seemed like bedrooms. The rooms were tiny, with beds that took up most of the space. I checked the drawers and closets, but it looked like everything valuable was long gone. Then I opened another door and found a staircase leading down to the basement. I hesitated for a second, but curiosity got the better of me. I started down the creaky steps, flashlight off because I noticed a faint glow coming from below. By the time I reached the bottom, I could see it clearly, two tall candles sitting on a table. But what caught my eye first was the rocking chair next to the table. It was moving, rocking slowly back and forth, and someone was sitting in it. The person was turned away from me, but I could see their hand gripping the armrest. My stomach dropped. I turned and started creeping back up the stairs as quietly as I could. Every step felt like it might give me away. When I was about halfway up, one of the steps creaked loudly, and I froze. My heart was pounding. Then, the faint glow of the candles below suddenly disappeared. The basement was pitch black. I forced myself to keep going, made it to the top, and quietly shut the door behind me. I needed to find Carlos and get the hell out of there. I found the staircase leading upstairs and called his name. He did not answer. Frustrated and panicked, I went up to find him, repeating his name louder and louder. Finally, he stepped out from a dark room and asked what was going on. "There's someone in the basement," I told him. "We need to leave. Now." That got his attention. He followed me back downstairs. As we passed the hallway with the basement door, we saw it. A silhouette of a man standing in front of the door. We froze for half a second before I whispered, "Just go." We bolted out the back door and sprinted to the car. I was out of breath by the time we got in, but I did not care. I backed out of there so fast, and we drove straight home. On the way, I told Carlos everything I had seen. He kept saying, "What the hell?" over and over, as if he could not process it. Neither of us ever went near that house again. To this day, I do not know who or what was in that basement, and honestly, I do not care to find out.